The storm split the desert wide open, thunder rolling across the land like cannon fire. Lightning flashed jagged and white, turning the sky into a battlefield of fire and shadow. The sisters Mara and Elsie ran as fast as their bare feet would carry them, the hard earth slick with rain and scattered stone cutting into their solace. Their thin dresses clung to their skin, plastered with mud, their hair whipping in the wind. Each breath came sharp and cold, the kind that burned in the lungs and made them stumble forward half blind. They had been wandering for hours before the sky broke open, searching for shelter, searching for anything. Food had been scarce for days. Mara's ribs ached with hunger, and Elsie's little stomach growled loudly enough to make her flinch. But the storm did not care for their suffering. It came down with a roar, the heavens spilling every ounce of fury they had saved up through the long dry weeks. It was Elsie who spotted the black mouth of the cave, half hidden beneath a tumble of stone and desert brush. She tugged at her sister's sleeve, her voice almost lost in the howling wind. Mara there. Mara turned, saw it, and without hesitation pulled her sister toward the shadowed opening. They scrambled over rocks, slipping, knees scraped raw, until they fell into the hollow of the cave. The world outside raged with rain and lightning, but inside it was a different kind of darkness, quiet, heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth. The echo of dripping water trickled down from somewhere deep within. The sisters collapsed against the wall, chests heaving, their breaths sounding loud in the hush. Mara wrapped an arm around Elsie, trying to calm her trembling. It was then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A low rattle, faint but clear, followed by a shallow breath. Mara stiffened. Her heart pounded hard enough to make her throat ache. She strained her ears, every muscle taut. Another rattle metal against stone. Mara? Elsie's whisper was barely a thread of sound. Mara pushed herself to her knees. The fire of caution battled the pull of curiosity in her chest. Slowly, she stepped forward, her bare feet whispering against the cave floor. Lightning flashed outside, flooding the entrance with light, and in that brief blaze, Mara saw something that made her blood turn cold. A man. He was slumped against the far wall, his body half hidden in shadow, but there was no mistaking the outline of broad shoulders and the glitter of iron. Chains, thick and rust-stained, clamped around his wrists, and ankles bolted into the rock itself. His chest rose and fell with ragged effort. Mara gasped and stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Elsie pressed against her side, clutching her arm. Who is it?" Elsie whispered. Mara's voice caught in her throat. "A man, chained." They both stared, thunder rolling like drums outside the cave. The air seemed to tighten, as though the desert itself held its breath. The figure stirred. His head lifted slowly, revealing a face hollowed by exhaustion, streaked with dirt and dried blood. Black hair hung loose around his shoulders, tangled and matted, and when his eyes opened, they caught the fire of another lightning flash, dark, piercing, alive. Elsie whimpered and buried her face in Mara's side. Mara's own body screamed to run, to flee into the storm, but her legs refused to move. She had heard stories her whole life, whispers about raiders, battles, the way folks in town spat the word Apache. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Never trust them. Never look them in the eye. They'll take everything from you if you let them. But this was no raider with weapons in his hands. This was a man broken, bound, left to rot in the shadows of stone. His lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was cracked and rasping, yet strong enough to reach them through the hush. Water? Just one word, but it seemed to hang in the air longer than the thunder. Mara clutched Elsie tighter. Her mind spun. Who would chain a man like this and leave him here? What crime had he committed, or had he simply been born on the wrong side of the river, into the wrong tribe, the wrong name? Her own hunger clawed at her belly. Their little gourd held only a swallow of water left, meant for survival through another day. And yet here was someone worse off than they were, someone who might die before morning if left untended. Mara. Elsie whispered, her voice trembling. He's hurting. Mara's throat tightened. She knew her sister's heart, too soft, too kind, even when the world had been cruel. But kindness could be dangerous. Kindness could get them killed. She stared at the chains again, the rust digging into torn flesh, and realized they were standing at the edge of a choice. The storm might pass. Hunger might be endured. But what they did next, whether they gave their last drop of water to this stranger or walked away, would change everything. And in the echo of that storm-ravaged cave, Mara understood for the first time that survival wasn't just about finding food or shelter. It was about the kind of people they chose to be. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cave it was as if time had slowed. Mara's hand hovered protectively over her little sister, though her eyes never left the chained man. He seemed more ghost than flesh, his face hollowed by suffering, his lips cracked, his body trembling with fever. He had asked for water, just one word. But in that moment it felt like a test of mercy, of fear, of survival. Mara reached down to her satchel and pulled out the small gourd they had guarded like treasure. The sisters had been without a real meal for 2 days, drinking only this water to keep the gnawing emptiness from overtaking them. If she gave it away, she risked her sister's life as much as her own. Mara, Elsie whispered, clutching her arm. What if he dies if we don't? Mara's chest ached. The man's eyes, though weary, were sharp enough to meet hers. They weren't pleading, exactly, just steady, as though he had faced death many times before and would face it again without fear. Yet still he had asked, slowly. Mara unscrewed the stopper and moved closer, every step heavy with doubt. The clink of the chains echoed in the cave as the warrior lifted his head higher. His lips parted, waiting. Mara tilted the gourd carefully, the last of their water slipping into his mouth. The sound of his swallowing was strangely loud in the hush. He drank greedily at first, then slowed, his body relaxing slightly as though the water revived him. A faint sigh escaped his chest, and for the first time since they had seen him, something human softened his face. Mara stepped back quickly, heart pounding. She had done it. She had chosen. The silence stretched until the man spoke again, his voice raw but clearer than before. You are sisters? Elsie peeked out from behind Mara's arm, her eyes wide. Yes, she whispered. He nodded once, slowly, as if tucking the knowledge away. His chain scraped against the stone as he shifted, trying to sit taller. Pain flickered across his features, but he forced himself upright, his back to the cave. Wall, they left me here, he said, voice strained. Men with pale faces, bounty hunters. They wanted me dead but feared my people would find my body, so they hid me in this hole. Mara's stomach tightened. She had heard about bounty hunters. Hard men who chased Apache warriors for coin, dragging them in alive or dead to prove their worth. Sometimes they brought scalps, sometimes worse. Elsie's small voice trembled. Why would they want you dead? The man's eyes turned to her, dark as obsidian, but not unkind. Because I would not kneel. Because I fought back. The fire crackled softly in the cave, though Mara wasn't sure if it gave warmth or only deepened the shadows. She studied him, his scars, the whip marks across his chest, the bruises ringing his wrists. He looked dangerous, yes, but he also looked broken in ways no man should be. Still, her father's warnings thundered in her mind. Never trust an Apache. She remembered how he had said they would raid ranches, steal horses, set fires. Yet the man before her did not carry fire or steel. He carried wounds, hunger, and chains. Elsie crept a little closer, the ragged hem of her dress brushing the ground. She pulled something from her pocket, a crust of stale bread they had saved for morning. Her hand shook as she held it out. Mara hissed, "Elsie!" But it was too late. The warrior reached out, his hand trembling but careful, as though he feared frightening the girl. He took the bread gently, his calloused fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. Then he brought it to his lips and ate, slowly, as though tasting something precious. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the rain's steady drum on the desert outside and the faint crack of thunder broke the silence. Mara finally pulled Elsie back against her side, whispering fiercely, "You can't trust him. He's dangerous." Elsie looked up at her with big shining eyes. "But Mara, so are we if we leave him here to die." The words stung more than Mara expected. She wanted to argue, to remind her sister of all the stories, the warnings. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the image of her mother's face, soft and tired, whispering to them before she passed, "Don't let the world make you cruel." The cave seemed to shrink around them, filled with hunger, fear, and a decision far larger than either girl's ears. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the sisters had fed and watered a man their town would have spit on or worse. And Mara realized that whatever came next, there was no turning back. The cave was heavy with the smell of damp stone and smoke. The fire Elsie had coaxed from brushwood crackled faintly, its glow licking shadows across the chained warrior's face. Mara sat opposite him, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the flames but feeling his gaze like a weight pressing on her skin. He had eaten the bread, drank their water, and yet he remained bound, wounded, a storm of silence between them. Elsie broke it first. "We can't leave him like this," Mara turned sharply. "And what do you think we should do, Elsie? March into town and ask for the blacksmith's key? Tell the sheriff we found an Apache chained in a cave?" Her sister shrank back but lifted her chin. "I didn't say that. I just mean he's still alive. And he's chained like an animal. It's wrong." The man's voice rose, low and gravelly, as though pulled from a deep well of pain. "They left me to die slowly. If you go, you'll not see me again." Mara looked up, startled. His eyes, dark and steady, fixed on her. There was no begging in them, only truth. "I don't know who you are," Mara said cautiously. "Maybe my pa was right. Maybe you're dangerous." His lips twitched in something that might have been a smile, though it carried no joy. "Dangerous, yes. I fought to keep my people safe, to keep the soldiers from taking more, to keep bounty hunters from hanging our sons, stealing our daughters." His voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "If that makes me dangerous, then so be it." Elsie leaned forward, wide-eyed. "What's your name?" He paused, as though weighing whether to trust them. "Tatsi." The name curled through the fenji, the fend through the mondizin, the gnome curled. Cave-like smoke, foreign yet grounding. Mara swallowed hard. She didn't want to know his name. Names made people real, harder to ignore, harder to leave behind. Tatsi shifted, his chains rattling against stone. "If you stay, you risk your lives. If you leave, you carry my death with you." The words struck Mara like a blow. She thought of Pa's grave by the river, marked with nothing but a crooked cross of driftwood. She thought of Ma, who had wasted away last winter in the cold. Death followed them already, sat at their table like an unwelcome guest. But this was different. This was a choice. Elsie's small hand slipped into hers. "Mara, please." He helped his people. Maybe he could help. US too. Mara almost laughed at the thought. Help them? What could a chained man give two starving orphans? And yet, her sister's eyes shone with a faith Mara hadn't felt in a long time. The fire hissed, collapsing inward as sparks rose to the cave ceiling. Mara stood, pacing the narrow floor, her shadow sliding across the walls. The desert storm had faded to a low rumble, but the weight inside the cave had only grown. "We need a plan," Mara muttered. "Even if we tried, how would we get him out of those chains?" They're iron, bolted into stone. Totsy's gaze followed her. A hammer, a chisel, tools the pale men used to build their fences. Mara froze. The thought of walking into town, stealing from the very people who had already turned their backs on her and Elsie, made her stomach twist. The townsfolk looked at them with pity, sometimes with scorn. Poor, ragged girls who should have been someone's charity case, but were instead left to fend for themselves. They begged scraps, dug roots, survived. If caught stealing, there would be no mercy. "It's impossible," she whispered. "Taz high single quotes, single steel, quiet but unyielding." Not impossible, only dangerous. Elsie's eyes lit with a fire Mara rarely saw. "We've been living with danger every day. Wolves, hunger, men in town who shout at us. Mara, maybe this is the one good thing we can do." Mara wanted to snap at her, remind her that children didn't free prisoners, that little girls didn't defy chains. But deep in her chest, something stirred anger, yes, but also a kind of longing. To be more than just survivors. To fight back, even in the smallest way. She looked at Totsy again. The flicker of firelight caught the curve of his shoulders, the raw iron cutting into his flesh. A warrior stripped of his freedom, yet still proud enough to meet her gaze without flinching. Her decision pressed against her like the storm had pressed against the desert. If they freed him, they risked death. If they walked away, they became something else entirely, something colder, smaller. Finally, Mara drew a slow breath. "If we do this, if we try, you swear you won't hurt us?" Totsy bowed his head, solemn, his voice carrying the weight of oath. "By the blood of my people, I will protect you as I would my own." The cave was silent but for the fire's crackle. Mara glanced at Elsie, whose face glowed with quiet hope. And in that moment, Mara knew she had already lost the argument. The choice had been made. The storm outside had spent itself, leaving the desert dripping and gleaming under a weak morning sun. Inside the cave, the fire Elsie had coaxed the night before sputtered and hissed as it consumed the last of the dry brushwood. Shadows danced across the walls, making the chains on Totsy's wrists glint like silver in the firelight. Mara and Elsie huddled closer to the warrior, their bodies stiff with fatigue, their stomachs still hollow from days without food. Totsy shifted slowly, testing the chains. Each movement drew a wince, but also revealed a strength that made Mara catch her breath. He had survived more than they could imagine, hunted, beaten, left to die, and yet here he was. His body coiled like a spring beneath the fireligt. Elsie, unable to bear the silence any longer, reached into her small satchel and pulled out the last crumbs of bread they had saved for the morning. Her hand shook, but she held it out. Totsy's dark eyes softened, a glimmer of surprise breaking through the fatigue. He accepted the bread with reverent care, his rough fingers brushing hers briefly. It was such a simple gesture, but for Elsie, it was monumental, a connection, a small thread of trust stretching across the gulf between captive and rescuer. When he finished, he looked at Mara, his voice quiet but steady. "You risked yourselves. Why?" Mara's jaw tightened. She wanted to tell him it was just instinct, that she had no choice, that the desert had made them both cautious and desperate. But looking into Totsy's eyes, she felt compelled to be honest. "Because it's wrong to leave someone to die," she said softly. "Even if the world says you should." He nodded slowly. "The world, yes. My people know this well. Trust is rare. Kindness even rarer." His gaze drifted toward the fire, then back to the girls. "I have been hunted all my life, taught to survive by fighting, running, hiding. But here, with you, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Safety, strange, but real. Elsie's eyes widened. Safety? She whispered, leaning against Mara's shoulder. Yes, he said, voice almost a whisper. You are small and yet brave. You could have left, but you stayed. That is a gift greater than any coin or weapon. Mara clenched her fists. It was strange, hearing praise from a man she had been told to fear. Her father's warnings, her mother's gentle voice, the harsh lessons of survival, they all collided inside her. And yet, beneath it, a stubborn spark of pride flared. They had done something good, something important. Totsy's chains rattled as he shifted again. I do not ask for your mercy. I accept it, yes, but I will repay it. You must know if freedom comes, it will be because of you. Elsie tilted her head, her small hands fiddling with the edge of her wet dress. What is freedom? She asked. Her voice carried innocence, but also a hunger for understanding, the kind Mara recognized as dangerous in the desert. Totsy's eyes darkened, reflecting a lifetime of loss. Freedom is not just walking without chains. It is living without fear. It is waking each day and choosing your own path, even when the world tries to force you to kneel. Mara studied him closely, the lines of his face carved by suffering yet softened by the firelight. And do you think you'll get that back? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment, gaze unwavering. If I can trust the small hands of strangers, then perhaps. I have fought, yes, but tonight the fight is not with swords or men. It is with choice, and you are part of it. The cave fell quiet again, save for the crackle of the fire and the slow drip of water from the cave ceiling. Outside, the desert glistened under the pale light, but inside, 3 souls huddled close, bound by something far stronger than chains, a fragile trust that had begun to take root. Mara finally exhaled, her body relaxing slightly. She glanced at Elsie, who smiled faintly, and then at Totsy, who remained watchful but calmer than before. For the first time since they had discovered him, Mara allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, not just for another day, but for the chance to do something truly meaningful. In that cave, under the flickering firelight, 3 strangers became something more than rescuer and rescued. They became companions, their fates intertwined, their choices echoing louder than the storm that had driven them together. And for Mara, the weight of chains, both visible and unseen, began to feel just a little lighter, as if the fire and the company of the warrior had burned away some of the fear that had haunted her all her life. The cave had grown warmer with the fire Mara and Elsie fed, but it was still cold against the damp desert morning. Water dripped from stalactites above, plinking against stone, each droplet a soft reminder of the storm that had passed. The air smelled of wet earth, charred brush, and sweat, a mixture of danger and survival. Totsy leaned against the cave wall, rubbing his wrists where the chains had cut deep lines into his skin. Mara noticed the dark bruises were still tender, but his movements were slower now, careful, measured. Strength was there coiled under the surface, but so was exhaustion. You were called Totsy, Mara said softly, almost as if speaking his name aloud might summon more of him than just the body in front of them. He nodded. Little son, he murmured, my people named me for hope. I suppose hope is a dangerous thing for a warrior. Elsie, curious and unafraid, asked, Why were you captured? Totsy's dark eyes flickered toward her, then back to Mara. They wanted to break me, to break my people. Men came with rifles, knives, and fire. They burned our lands, took our food, scattered our families. I tried to stop them. I fought to protect what little remained, and when I was captured, they left me here chained in a hole in the rocks to die slowly while they collected their coins and their glory. Mara's throat tightened. The wind outside whistled through the cave entrance, a soft, mournful sound. She realized the storm wasn't finished. It had only shifted, leaving a quiet echo in the desert, like the desert itself had listened and was now grieving. Elsie moved closer. To Tatsi, her small hand brushing his arm instinctively. "It sounds so lonely," she whispered. Tatsi's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "It is," he admitted, "and yet, in that loneliness, I found silence. A quiet to remember my people, my home, the songs my mother used to sing, songs of wind and water, of animals and the earth. Songs to remind me that even when everything is taken, some part of you remains." Mara's gaze softened. For the first time, she saw not just a warrior or a prisoner, but a man who had survived cruelty and loss with dignity intact. His dark skin bore the marks of pain, yet his posture, though chained, carried a quiet pride. "I used to think strength was all that mattered," Tatsi continued. "Muscles, skill with weapons. But I have learned that survival is nothing without something to protect. Without hope, without family, without kindness. What is strength worth?" Mara thought of Elsie, small and trembling yet fearless in the face of him. She thought of herself and how she had clutched the water gourd to save a life, knowing it might cost her own. Perhaps Tatsi was right. Strength without heart, courage without compassion, it was hollow. Outside, the desert came, alive in the aftermath of the storm. Birds called softly from distant cliffs, their cries echoing faintly in the canyon below. Water pooled in small rivulets, reflecting the pale morning sun. A breeze stirred the cave mouth, carrying the scent of wet sage and crushed grass. Mara shivered, but not from cold. It was the strange, raw beauty of life persisting after destruction, a mirror of what was happening inside the cave. Tatsi's eyes followed the movement outside, then back to the sisters. "You have brought life into this place," he said, quietly. "Not just fire, not just bread or water. Life. You remind me that the world is not only cruel, that there are hands willing to lift others from despair." Elsie smiled faintly, brushing her damp hair from her face. "It's easier to help someone who needs it," she said simply. Tatsi's dark gaze lingered on her, then shifted to Mara. "You have courage, Elder One, and a fire in your chest that is stronger than any of theirs outside. The men who left me here, they feared that fire, even in a child. It is why I have survived this long." Mara felt a shiver of both fear and pride. The chains that bound Tatsi were still iron, still cruel, but somehow they no longer seemed insurmountable. There was a rhythm in the cave, now a fragile, unspoken understanding. Tatsi would trust them if they trusted him. Mara and Elsie would risk danger because he had survived this long, because he had opened his heart to them, because for the first time, 3 lives converged in a moment that might change them all. And so, as firelight flickered across bruised skin and dirt-streaked faces, the desert hummed quietly around them. It was a song of survival, of pain endured and hope clinging stubbornly to life. 3 souls, bound by circumstance and choice, listened. Together and in that fragile harmony, the first threads of trust and destiny were woven. Morning arrived in the desert with pale, hesitant light spilling across the cave's mouth. Mara rubbed her eyes, feeling the ache of 2 sleepless nights in her muscles. Even as the fire's embers still smoldered, the weight of what they had, agreed upon, pressed on her chest. They had to free Tatsi. The chains were cruel. Thick iron looping around his wrists and ankles bolted deep into the cave wall. Mara traced them with her eyes, imagining the strength it would take to break them. Tatsi's muscles flexed under the strain of the cold metal, veins standing like cords along his forearms. The warrior had survived worse, yet the chains bound. Him not just physically, but as a symbol of the men who had tried to erase him. Elsie hovered nearby, clutching a small bundle of roots they had gathered for breakfast. "How will we do it?" she asked softly. Mara's jaw tightened. She had considered every possibility while staring at the chains the night before. There was only one way: tools. A hammer, a chisel, something sharp to pry or chip at the iron. But the town that bordered the desert was no safe place. Strangers watched, neighbors frowned, and anyone caught helping an Apache or even suspected of it would be in serious trouble. "We'll need to get tools," Mara said finally, her voice low, determined. "From the blacksmith, from the town." Elsie's eyes widened. "Steal?" Mara shook her head. "Not steal? Take what we need to save him. If we are caught, we'll just have to run. I'd rather face that than leave him here to die." Totsy's dark eyes followed them. He said nothing, but Mara felt the weight of his gaze, steady and heavy. There was understanding there, acknowledgement, and a strange calm that steadied her nerves. "You are brave," he said finally, voice low and firm. "Bravery can be as dangerous as chains. I do not ask for this, but if you choose, I will fight to survive, not just for myself, but for you." "I promise." Mara swallowed hard. His words gave her courage and fear in equal measure. She had never felt responsibility for another person in this way, never with stakes so high. Her father's warnings rang in her mind, trusting an Apache, risking her life, but now they were distant echoes. Here, in this cave, morality and survival entwined in a way that left no room for hesitation. The sisters ate a meager breakfast of roots and scraps of bread. Their hands trembled not from hunger, but from anticipation. Mara carefully examined the cave entrance and the path to town, memorizing every rock and shadow. Rain had made the desert slick. Every step would be a challenge. Every noise could alert someone. By midday, the plan was set. Mara would sneak into town, timing her steps with the slow movement of townsfolk and the distant sounds of wagon wheels and livestock. Elsie would remain behind, guarding Totsy and keeping watch on the cave mouth. The fire would be kept low, only a flicker to give warmth without revealing their presence. Totsy flexed his shoulders against the chains, testing again. Mara noticed the raw flesh, the bruises darkening, the way his hands clenched unconsciously. The sight steeled her resolve. They could not delay. Every hour he remained bound was another hour closer to death. As the sisters prepared, a hush fell over the cave. Totsy's voice, quiet yet strong, broke it. "I will not forget this," he said, eyes dark and solemn. "If I am freed, I will not run. I will fight not with weapons against your enemies, but with every strength I have to survive and protect. That is my oath." Mara's throat tightened. An oath in his culture was not a simple promise. It was binding, a sacred word. She met Elsie's gaze and saw the same mixture of fear and determination reflected there. Night would come again, before the chains could fall, but the first step had been taken. A plan existed. Courage had been summoned. The cave no longer felt like a prison, but a waiting place, a threshold between fear and action. The desert outside was quiet, save for the slow drip of water from the cave ceiling and the distant call of a lone coyote. Mara and Elsie glanced at Totsy one last time before leaving. He sat still, head high, muscles tensed against the iron, his eyes unwavering. In that moment, they understood something essential. Freeing him was not just about the chains, but about reclaiming a piece of humanity in a world that had tried to strip it away. And so, with hearts pounding and hands shaking, Mara and Elsie prepared to step into danger, knowing the risk, driven by a choice that could change everything. Night had fallen over the desert, the sky a canvas of stars blurred by wisps of drifting clouds. The wind whispered through the rocks outside the cave, carrying the faint smell of sage and damp earth. Mara crouched at the cave's mouth, her fingers gripping a small hammer and chisel she had stolen from the town's blacksmith earlier that day. Her heart raced, a frantic drum in her chest. Every shadow could be a watcher, every step outside the cave a trap. Elsie stayed behind, keeping Tatsy's fire low, a faint flicker illuminating his bruised, chained form. The warrior's dark eyes followed Mara as she knelt beside the iron bolts, silent but alive with anticipation. He flexed his wrists gently against the cold chains, testing them, letting Mara measure the metal's strength. "Are you sure this will work?" Elsie whispered from the back of the cave. Mara's jaw tightened. "It has to. There's no other way. We can't leave him here to die." Tatsy's gaze softened toward the sisters, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust they had placed in him. "Then do not fear," he said, voice low but steady. "I will endure, and we will see this through." Mara's hammer struck the bolt, a metallic clang that echoed in the cavern. Sparks flew faintly as the chisel pressed against iron. Every strike made her hands ache, but she refused to stop. She glanced back at Elsie, whose small hands clutched a piece of bread they had saved, a silent promise of survival. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat ran down Mara's face, mingling with the dust and the rain from earlier in the day. The bolt groaned under her repeated strikes. She glanced at Tatsy, his muscles coiled like springs, his arms straining against the chains, veins standing out starkly in the firelight. The warrior was patient, enduring the pain of every movement, every jolt of iron against raw flesh, yet he never lost his focus, never flinched. Finally, a crack ran through the metal, a sharp note that made Mara's chest leap. Another strike, and the bolt twisted free. She stepped back, heart pounding, and motioned toward Tatsy. He flexed, testing the chains again, then with a slow, careful motion, wrenched his wrists free. The iron fell to the ground with a dull thud. Tatsy rubbed his bruised skin, tasting freedom for the first time in days. A low exhale of relief escaped him, but it was mingled with quiet anger, the kind that only those who have been betrayed and hunted feel. "Are you hurt?" Mara asked, stepping closer. Tatsy shook his head slightly. More tired than hurt, and grateful. His dark eyes met hers, then Elsie's. "You have risked yourselves for a stranger. That is no small thing in this world." Elsie smiled faintly, stepping forward. "We couldn't leave you." The cave seemed to breathe around them, walls echoing with the clinks of dropped chains, the rustle of fabric, the wind outside. Tatsy flexed his shoulders, standing tall for the first time in days, shirtless and raw, his tribal jewelry catching the faint firelight. Mara and Elsie watched him, awe and relief intertwining in their expressions. "Now," Tatsy said, voice low but commanding, "we leave. There are still those who would see me chained, or worse. But with your courage, we have a chance." Mara nodded. "Where will we go?" "First, away from this cave," Tatsy said. "Then, into the desert, to a place where your small hands and my strength can keep us safe." Together, they stepped out into the night. The desert had calmed, the storm fully spent, leaving pools of water reflecting the stars. The air was sharp, clean, and alive. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mara and Elsie breathed without the tight clutch of fear, and Tatsy walked without the weight of iron biting into his skin. As they moved, Mara felt something shift inside her. The fear, the despair, the sense of being small and powerless, it was replaced by courage. Not the reckless courage of youth, but the kind that came from knowing you had chosen rightly, that you had saved life when it could have been easy to turn away. Tazi, free and unchained, glanced back at the cave, then at the sisters. "You are not like the others," he said. "Bravery is rare, kindness rarer still. I will not forget this night, nor the lives it saved, including my own." Mara glanced at Elsie, who nodded slightly, tired but resolute. Together the three of them disappeared into the desert night, shadows merging with moonlight and starlight, moving toward freedom, toward survival, toward a future forged by courage, compassion, and trust. The desert whispered around them, carrying away chains, fear, and sorrow. In their place came something stronger, hope.